For a long moment, nobody spoke. David held the large brass key carefully in both hands. It was far heavier than it looked, and although the underground chamber was cool, the polished brass felt strangely warm, as though someone else had been holding it only moments before. Peter looked towards Miss Ashcombe. "So the lantern is the last of the 4 tokens?" Miss Ashcombe nodded slowly. "Yes. The lantern is not simply an object. It is the heart of the circle. Without it, the 4 tokens cannot awaken the ancient magic that protects Haydn." Simon frowned. "Then why hide them?" Miss Ashcombe smiled. "Because true magic belongs to those who seek wisdom, never those who seek power." As she spoke, the candles around the chamber flickered. For a brief second, the boys thought they saw several shadowy figures standing among the stone pillars. Women dressed in the long black gowns once worn by Haydn's headmistresses. Each carried either a slender supple cane or a well-worn rubber-soled carpet slipper beneath one arm. Then they vanished. Andrew swallowed. "Did anyone else see that?" Miss Ashcombe simply nodded. "The old guardians are watching. They were once teachers here, and in their day, discipline was considered just as important as education." The 4 friends left the observatory just as the first drops of rain began to fall. By the time they reached the chapel, a steady autumn shower covered the ancient buildings. The old stone walls glistened beneath the grey sky. Peter stopped beneath the great cedar tree. "Listen." Everyone became silent. Very faintly. They could hear singing, not from the chapel, not from the classrooms. It seemed to rise from somewhere deep beneath the ground. Andrew looked puzzled. "I've never heard anything like it." Miss Ashcombe closed her eyes. "The hill is remembering. The old coven that once protected Haydn gathered beneath this ground hundreds of years ago. Their voices still echo whenever powerful magic is awakened." A sudden gust of wind swept through the branches. The boys heard another sound. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed along the chapel path, like the sound of a cane striking polished wooden floorboards. Peter looked around. "There isn't anyone there." "There doesn't need to be," Miss Ashcombe replied quietly. "The old headmistresses often walk the corridors long after midnight. They still inspect the school they once ruled. Many generations of boys feared hearing that sound outside the dormitories." Simon gave an uneasy smile. "I suppose nobody wanted a visit from the headmistress." Miss Ashcombe laughed softly. "Indeed not. In those days, a trip to the study could easily end with a lecture, followed by the cane or the rubber-soled slipper. Fortunately, those days are now part of Haydn's history." That evening after supper, Miss Blyton invited the boys back to the hidden library. The enchanted diary still lay open on the great oak table. Nobody had touched it, yet another page had filled itself with neat flowing handwriting. David read aloud. "3 tokens have returned. The lantern must be carried before the first frost. Only then may the circle be restored. Beware the silent door." Peter looked up. "The silent door? I've never heard of it." Miss Blyton reached for another ancient journal. Dust drifted into the candlelight as she carefully turned its yellowed pages. At last, she stopped. "I thought so." The faded sketch showed the underground chamber beneath the chapel. Behind the great stone table, someone had drawn another doorway, one that none of them had ever seen. Above it were 2 simple words, "Silent Door." Andrew frowned. "It wasn't there." "We searched everywhere." Miss Ashcombe nodded. "It only reveals itself when the circle begins to awaken." As she closed the journal, another page slipped loose. It showed a faded drawing of Haydn, nearly 200 years earlier. Standing beside the chapel were several stern-looking ladies wearing dark academic gowns. One held a polished cane. Another carried a red and black rubber-soled slipper. Written beneath the picture were the words, "The guardians of order protect both learning and magic." Peter stared at the drawing. "Those are the ghosts we saw." "I believe they are," said Miss Blyton. They were real women. They believed discipline, honesty, and courage were as important as spells and learning. The following evening, the four friends returned beneath the great cedar tree. The brass lantern floated silently ahead of them. Its pale golden light revealed strange symbols that none of them had noticed before. Ancient pentacles, runes, moon symbols, oak leaves, silver ravens. The very stones seemed alive with old witchcraft. As they descended the winding staircase, whispers echoed around them. Not frightening whispers, gentle ones, old teachers quietly reciting lessons, ancient blessings, protective charms. Now and then came another familiar sound, the quiet tap of a cane upon stone, the soft scrape of a rubber-soled slipper. David smiled nervously. "I think the old staff still patrol these passages." Miss Ashcombe nodded. "They never truly left. They simply became part of the school." The underground chamber looked exactly as before. The stone pillars stood silently. The old journals rested inside their wooden chest. Peter walked behind the stone table. There, where solid stone had once stood now, appeared a tall arched doorway. There was no handle, no hinges, no lock, only four carved hollows, a raven, an oak leaf, a key, a lantern. David placed the raven token into the first space. It fitted perfectly. Simon added the oak leaf. Andrew carefully lifted the heavy brass key into the third carving. The doorway began to glow. Only one space remained. The lantern. David gently placed it into the final hollow. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Then the lantern burst into warm golden light. Ancient witch symbols spread across the doorway like living vines. Protective circles, stars, pentacles, runes, moon phases. They shimmered before slowly fading away. The doorway opened without making the slightest sound. "So that's why it's called the Silent Door," Peter whispered. Beyond it stretched a passage, unlike anything they had seen before. The walls sparkled with thousands of tiny crystals. Blue flames floated through the air without smoke. The ceiling looked like the night sky itself. Small silver stars slowly moved across it. As they walked forward, they realized they were not alone. Ghostly figures stood quietly along the passage. Former teachers, old pupils, headmistresses from centuries past. None looked frightening. They simply watched. Several carried their old canes. Others still held the familiar rubber-soled slippers that had once represented the strict discipline of another age. Each inclined their head respectfully as the boys passed. "They're welcoming us," whispered Simon. Miss Ashcombe smiled. "They know the circle has found new keepers." At the far end stood a magnificent circular chamber. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of leather-bound books, ancient scrolls, maps, astronomical charts, pressed herbs, crystal wands, spell books, bundles of dried plants, carved staffs, athames, cauldrons, beautiful drawings of sacred groves, standing stones, ravens, owls, and moonlit forests. In the centre stood a great stone circle marked with glowing pentacles. The air hummed gently with peaceful magic. Miss Ashcombe looked around with quiet wonder. The library of the keepers. Peter slowly turned in amazement. No one knew this existed. They weren't meant to. This knowledge was never hidden because it was dangerous. It was hidden because it was precious. David walked slowly towards a stone pedestal. Resting upon it was a single unopened book bound in deep green leather. There was no title. Only 4 familiar symbols pressed into the cover in shining gold. As his fingers gently touched the book, it opened by itself. A gentle breeze filled the room. The ghostly teachers bowed their heads. The lantern shone brighter than ever. Fresh ink slowly appeared upon the first page. "Welcome, keepers of Haydn. Your true work begins now. Guard the circle. Protect the ancient magic. Learn wisely. Lead kindly. The four boys exchanged astonished glances. They had believed they were searching for Haydn's greatest secret. Instead, they had only just taken their very first steps into the ancient magic that had protected Haydn School for centuries.